Since making his debut in 1996, there have been many faces of Mark Henry. Perhaps you were a big fan of that outrageous America singlet that he wore during his debut. Maybe you liked the Nation of Domination Mark Henry. Maybe, just maybe, sexual chocolate. The controversial sexual chocolate, or maybe not, as we'll find out in just a bit. Maybe that was your favourite thing. Maybe, you like me, you loved him in the Hall of Pain gimmick. That was his most successful too. Or perhaps you just really liked him in that pink suit during his fake retirement. That was indeed delicious. Whatever the case, over a 20-year career, it's fair to say that Henry has left his mark on the business. And let's just ring out a few more name puns in there, because despite looking like a man who could rip you open like a packet of crisps or throw you around like an empty tracksuit, it's fair to say that he's Mark by name and Mark by nature, because this man just absolutely loves the wrestling business, and working for WWE was a dream come true for him. And Henry was the latest person to sit down with Stone Cold Steve Austin on his Broken Skull Sessions podcast, as the rattlesnake tried to crack open the nut that is the brain of Mark Henry and pull out a bunch of lovely anecdotes for you to have from me, who put them all into one nice little video, because who can be bothered to watch that when you can just watch someone else who's watched it for you? What's the time? Yep, that's about right. The intro is done now. Let's get on with this video, shall we? My name is Adam Nicholas. This is What Culture Wrestling, and these are the 10 things we learned from Mark Henry on Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions podcast. Number 10. Driving YOKO was his original gig. After calling up Mark Henry in 1996 to try and sign him, Vince McMahon matter of fact told the big man that it was the job of new talent to pay their dues and to look after the current stars of the company. And that meant that when Henry joined, he would be assigned the task of being the driver of one Yokozuna. Was Henry upset about this? Absolutely not. He said it was an absolute honour. But despite the fact that Yokozuna would have been in a position of power, the former WWF champion treated him with nothing but respect. In fact, it was the complete opposite of disrespecting him. He looked after him as much as he possibly could, and he said that Yokozuna came to be one of the most honest men that he would ever meet in the wrestling business. If he didn't like something, he was just going to tell you. But not only was he not a dick to Mark Henry, but he also took him to his first ever strip club. Try and picture that. Yokozuna and Mark Henry in a strip club. And that, for a guy who was as straight-laced as Mark Henry, didn't drink, didn't do drugs, didn't party, that must have been a bit of a mind blower, to be honest. Number 9. Henry's first meeting with Taker didn't go well. Now, originally, when Mark Henry first met The Undertaker, things did not quite go to plan, I think you could probably say. Taker and him didn't quite hit it off, because as Henry turned up to go and talk to his good pal Yokozuna about something, he was sitting with his BSK buddy, The Undertaker, and the dead man said, "Oi, here's our new babyface," as he greeted him as he came over to the table. But unfortunately, Mark Henry didn't know any insider terms at the time, and basically thought that the dead man was calling him a big baby. So obviously not the best start then, and that relationship with The Undertaker was rocked immediately, because the dead man, I guess, hadn't really understood just how big of a chip on his shoulder Mark Henry actually had. Loads of people didn't think he was supposed to be there, and that he was just a guy who was like trying to fake it till he made it. But the dead man saw a passion in Henry and appreciated it a lot, so decided to take him under his wing and mentor him and try and improve his career in the business, and stood by him when a lot of other people wouldn't. And as a result, the two are really good friends to this day. Number 8. Ron Simmons was the only person he was afraid of. Now, considering Mark Henry was prepared to go toe-to-toe, one-on-one with the dead man on day 1 pretty much of working in WWE, when he felt like he was being disrespected, that should give you a good gauge that this guy was not going to take shit from anyone. Unless that person's name was Ron Simmons, because he told Stone Cold Steve Austin he was absolutely deathly afraid of Simmons. Henry said that whenever he thought about how on earth he would actually approach a real fight with Simmons, which should just kind of give you a little bit more of an insight into the mentality of him at this exact time in WWE, he said he was completely stumped and he just didn't know where he would start. He said one day he was looking across at Simmons in the locker room, and the two locked eyes as Simmons caught him. Simmons then said, "What are you looking at me like that for? You want to try me?" To which point Mark Henry said, no sir, because he didn't want any of that, genuinely was terrified of this man, wasn't sure what to do with him, and kind of de-escalated the whole thing. But to be fair, since then, the two of them ended up becoming pretty good friends, and on top of that, basically Simmons acted like a father figure to Henry, helping him and guiding him through certain parts of his career. Number 7. Mark actually loved the sexual chocolate gimmick. Now, Mark Henry absolutely adored working with Mae Young, a career highlight for him, he says, because she was just such an iron lady of wrestling, and he knew he was getting a good opportunity to work with her. But on top of that, the little thing that I found interesting here was that he said he was the one who actually came up with the sexual chocolate gimmick. I know lots of people have had Well, a lot to say about the gimmick in the past, assuming the worst, but it turns out Henry says it was his idea, and it came up when he and The Rock and D'Lo Brown were on a car journey in 1998. He kind of developed it, but then D'Lo Brown was quick to say to him that WWE, of all people, would never go for this idea, according to Brown. But obviously, he hadn't been working there enough, because this seems like something they would definitely go for, and sure enough they did. Henry says at this point in his career it was a really exciting time to work for WWE. Vince McMahon was very much into him and had loads of ideas every evening about what they were going to do that night, and he said basically he just couldn't wait to get into work to see what Vince had planned for him. Now, as you can imagine, this was an exciting time for Mark Henry to be in the company, an exciting time to be him, no less, because it re-motivated him and he wanted to improve as a WWE superstar. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way. Henry found himself gaining weight, and with that weight gain came a demotion to Ohio Valley Wrestling, where he was sent to try and improve his conditioning and his in-ring skills as soon as possible. The whole thing sent him into a bit of a spiral of self-doubt, and he was a long way from that sexual chocolate character that he was enjoying so much. Number 6, his kinship with WCW's Bill DeMott. Mark Henry says he met Bill DeMott when both were in town for the 4th Brian Pillman Memorial Show in 2001. The two guys hit it off massively backstage and were talking to each other for 30 minutes before even finding out each other's names, and then ultimately finding out that they'd actually be working each other that very same night. Now, at the time, DeMott needed this to be a success because the whole WCW invasion angle was kind of sagging, and so too with it was his career and potentials of actually succeeding in the company. He said to Henry that he needed this match to be a hit, and funny enough, Henry understood just where he was coming from, because he was going through a bit of a sagging moment himself for completely different reasons. The two agreed to try and tear the house down together and try and work a traditional big man match, and when they did, they went back to the locker room afterwards, and who should come out to greet them and congratulate them but one Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. High praise in itself, but the fact that Steamboat then said to them that it was amazing to see that psychology was still alive in our business was something that lasted with Henry forever. The fact that Steamboat actually used the term our business was the first time Henry said that he actually felt like he belonged in WWE. Number 5, Vince McMahon's ultimatum. Now, around about the same time, Mark Henry began reading interviews with people in the Muscle and Fitness magazine, people who were part of the strongman world, who were saying that Mark Henry wasn't actually a real strongman. That whole thing did not sit well with Henry at all, and he realized that he needed to do something about this. So he organized a meeting with Vince McMahon. The two sat down, and he said that he needed to prove these people wrong. Vince McMahon agreed with him, but also said that failure was not an option. He told Henry that there was no room in his company for the second strongest man in the world, and that kind of resonated with him because he completely understood the logic of Vince McMahon. As you can imagine, I only want one big strong man, not number 2. Imagine him settling for anything less than numero uno. Still, it motivated Henry. He decided to completely commit himself to the world of powerlifting because he wanted to prove all these people wrong who'd been dissing him for so long. Now, fortunately, things worked out. Henry went away and proved himself, and would then ultimately come back on WWE television in 2002. But had he not managed to do that, Vince McMahon had basically told him he'd be fired. So, yeah, motivation, eh? What a wonderful thing. Number 4, Mark thinks Keith Lee is bringing back big guy magic. Now, if Keith Lee was indeed watching Mark Henry on Stone Cold's Broken Skull Sessions podcast, I can imagine he's probably a very happy guy right about now, because Mark Henry was extremely glowing about his praise when it came to the big man. Henry told Austin that he thought the NXT North American champion was the future of the industry, not just NXT, the entire wrestling industry. He said he feels like Lee is doing his best to change the perception of the big man role in both WWE and I guess the wider wrestling world, and that can only be a good thing. Austin was very quick to say that he felt like Lee still had a long way to go and a lot to learn, but nevertheless, they both were glowing in their praise of the North American champion. Number 3, Hall of Pain was born from a rib. Now, when Mark Henry arrived to tape an episode of SmackDown in June 2011, he was told that he would be working Christian in a pre-tape match that evening, but once he'd finished that match, he went to the back and spoke to Vince McMahon. Vince told him, actually Mark, we need you for one more match that we're going to tape at the end of the show. Mark obviously agreed because that's his boss and that's what you do. That match was supposed to be against Sin Cara, so as you can imagine, Henry went down to the ring, got in the ring, waited, and then became very pissed off when he realized that Sin Cara wasn't coming out. Tony Kimmel said thank you everybody for coming to the show and announced that that was the end of it, and he realized that he'd been completely and utterly ribbed by the boss. Henry was not in the mood at all though, and decided to completely wreck up the joint, smash the place up entirely. He was furious. He went backstage to try and find Vince and anybody in Gorilla, But of course, as it happens, they'd all already left. Henry was so angry about the whole thing that he called Vince McMahon up, left him a voice message and basically said, "That's it, I quit the company." Vince the next day had to sort of try and fix all of this because he realised it had gone a little bit too far. What was supposed to be a prank had been taken to heart. He apologised to Henry, but he said, would he mind coming to watch some tape with him? As he got in there, he showed him the tape and the footage of Henry completely losing his shit, and he paused it and said, "Look at that. If you can get that anger that we could see there, and we can put that on TV, you and I are going to make a lot of money." Number 2, why he was worried about his new character. Now, as brilliant as the Hall of Pain gimmick was, and as good at it as Mark Henry was, the whole thing at the beginning was something that he really struggled to adapt to. Henry said he was tentative about committing to the role because ultimately he didn't know if he'd be able to control that anger. You saw how angry he got on the tapes that Vince McMahon had shown him, and he wasn't sure if he'd be able to keep a lid on that without somebody getting hurt. He thought that was going to be a bad time for anybody and everybody who worked with him, but Vince assured him, "I trust you and I believe that you'll be able to discipline yourself and keep this character in check," which ultimately he was right. On top of that though, Henry said he was also worried about the message that it was going to send to younger kids. He says he loves entertaining the kids as part of his job, but how are they going to react to, in his words, a big black dude scaring everybody around him, because that whole thing comes with its own connotations and perceptions. It took him a little while, but he did realise he could completely separate the two from his life. He's got the one guy who he is on TV, but then obviously at signings and backstage and everywhere where he got to meet audience members and sign stuff and genuinely take photos with people and be a good dude, he could really invest heavily in that and make sure that everybody understood that this was just a character he played and not the real life thing. But still, you can understand his concerns. And number 1, with a bullet, Henry's revenge on JR. After becoming the World Heavyweight Champion in 2011, Mark Henry would find himself in an in-ring interview segment with JR. The only problem here was that this segment meant a whole lot more to Mark Henry than it did to Jim Ross, because there was a bit of history there. You see, years earlier, he'd actually been in a room with Jim Ross and Vince McMahon, and JR had said to Vince that he thought they should cut their losses because Henry was never going to become what he wanted him to become. That's got to sting a little bit, and it's safe to say this elephant did not forget. So as you can imagine, when it came to doing this segment, Henry decided to kind of use it a little bit to get a teeny fragment of revenge on Jim Ross, because at one point he had to grab JR's tie and he said he wrapped it around his fist and pulled it and really kind of focused in on JR to scare the shit out of him, because let's be honest, wouldn't you be scared shitless? Now, unless you'd been in that room with JR, Vince and Mark Henry, you wouldn't know just how much emotional baggage was attached to this tie-grabbing segment, and Stone Cold Steve Austin certainly didn't by the expression on his face. But ultimately, Henry said while he had a lot of respect for JR, he found it extremely frustrating and extremely disheartening that a person in such a position of power didn't have mutual respect for him back in the day. So there you have it. Those are the 10 things that we learned from Mark Henry on Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions podcast. What did you think of it though? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share. Hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. You can find the original article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. You can follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me on Twitter, if indeed that is your thing, at It's Adam Nicholas. Or if you would just like some more videos, there should be some just over here. I've been Adam Nicholas, this has been What Culture Wrestling, and I will see you next time.